Hello and welcome to B&E Now, a podcast about independent game development. I'm your host, Tobiah Marks, and with me today is Chris Zukowski. Hey,
Hi.
Chris.
Hello.
You're from Level 27 Industries. No, Floor 27 Industries. I already messed it up. So tell me about it. How did you start the company?
I worked across the way from a couple guys. We all worked for the same company.
Mm-hmm.
We had very similar interests. We said, "Hey, let's do something on the side," and we decided to make some games. We had a very compatible ability to kind of make these games together, and we said, "This is going to be great." So we formed a company and released our first game, which was called Rotato.
Cool. So first off, why games in general? Why do you want to make games?
Games are strangely the medium that I know people are paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
All other mediums like painting, they say like in art galleries, people spend an average like 20 seconds in front of a painting. You look at it, you say like, oh, there's like a guy, there's a tree. Yeah, okay, got it. And then you move on. Movies, I've actually ironed shirts while watching Die Hard.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like you just don't know if people are paying attention. But games are, you've got them engaged. And it's something that you can't play a game and not engage with it. Like if somebody said they played my game, they're gonna have opinions on it. They're gonna interact with it. So games are the medium that really just grab people. There's no way around it. You've got to play it.
Interesting answer. I heard a lot of people say that games are the new rock and roll. Like what rock and roll was in the 60s and 70s, in terms of people, the mainstream didn't really understand it, yet it was super popular, and disparaging between the way the media portrayed the medium and the way anyone over the age of 40 understood it versus everyone else under 30. And games are kind of in that spot right now.
I guess from a revolutionary standpoint, to say, hey, the older generation doesn't get it, I think that's to misunderstand rock and roll. I don't think games are rock and roll. Rock and roll is just so much cooler than games.
Oh, yeah?
But
why
anyway,
is that? I think games are really rock and roll. So why do you think games aren't cool in that, I don't know, traditional cool sense?
They have absolutely no sex appeal.
I feel like that's just wrong.
I don't know if you've ever rock and roll and heavy in Mustang convertibles, they go well together. It's about rock and roll is about swooning people, one person trying to impress the other person, swooning.
Yeah, one person trying to impress the other. It's online multiplayer. Like what you're defining as sex appeal. Like when you say a car is a sex appeal, you don't literally mean that you want to have sex with the car. And it's that same sense. Games have that same kind of sex appeal where it's something super engaging, interesting. It's just to a different
single person.
Set.
But see, the thing about rock and roll is, it is actually I'm not even a big fan of rock and roll,
Mm-hmm.
but they have so much more than video games on as far as connecting people emotionally. I think I love video games. I make them, but I don't think that they are the same as rock and roll.
I'll fight you on the emotional point too. Have you played Gone Home?
Yes, I have played Gone Home.
Okay, well.
Okay,
here's
the thing: is you can drive across the country to rock and roll and remember where you were when you heard a song. And I feel like that's a different space than when you play a game. And I loved Gone Home. Don't get me wrong. But it is the only thing that I think that rock and roll and video games share in that specific sense is that the older generation doesn't understand it. I totally agree with you on that. But I don't believe that video games have the same cultural impact as rock and roll.
Now, I disagree with you, but I'll move on because we could probably debate that all day. Like, what kind of games appeal to you? When you say games, what are you, an action game or RPG, story?
I think a game that engages me is probably Civilization is probably the best example of it. Civilization 2, I actually played that game when I was a kid so much that my right hand hurt. I got carpal tunnel syndrome, or the early stages of carpal tunnel syndrome from playing that game. I think it's because I like the idea of playing the game before you actually play it. Like, I had so many plans in my head about what I was going to do in Civilization.
You like thinking ahead.
Exactly. I like the idea that you understand the systems and the game so well in your head that you're actually playing it before you actually do it. And I think that is what my favorite type of game is one that you're actually pre-planning.
Very cool, very cool. So, have you made a game before you started 427? See, I got it right the second time.
Yeah, actually, well, if we really want to call games, I made them even when I was a kid. Like I invented a sport in which you'd hold a PVC pipe and hit a volleyball with either end of it, like Donatello. You were like holding a giant PVC.
Nice.
It was face to face. It was almost like a combination of hockey goalies playing off of each other.
Mm-hmm.
I consider that my first game. It was it had a very limited release to the kids in the neighborhood.
No, but I like that you like think about that is a game and that is game design. You know, too many people think that it's just digital games because that's what's new and interesting in the last 30, 40 years.
Oh
But
no, absolutely
games are
not.
everywhere.
No, I think there's always a set of kids on the playground who invent games for other kids.
Mm-hmm.
You see it everywhere, and those are the game designers. And I definitely was one of those kids.
Very cool. But so what's your first digital game?
Well, the first digital game that I've released that has been played by other people was actually about 10 years ago, or 2010 was when it was released.
Okay, so not 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
5 years ago. What year is this? Anyway, so it was a game called City Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
It actually released on Xbox Live Indie Games.
Very cool.
And it was a game about traveling back in time. It was actually it was Groundhog Day, the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you would actually replay the same day over and over again, and you had to solve puzzles within that 24 hours. And then by the end of it, the puzzle would reset itself.
Interesting. So were you inspired by like Braid or?
Yeah, I would say Braid was inspirational because the idea was that a person could make a game. And I think that was what really set it off. Like I'd always been a game fan, like playing video games like all through my life. I dressed up as Link for Halloween one year when I was like 10 or some whatever. So I was always deep into games, but it wasn't until Braid when I saw that it's not a huge team that makes them, it's one person. And that's what really got me to say, oh, I can do this. I know how to make games.
So did you just make that game, then you like put it down for a while, or did you start making games constantly?
I made games constantly, but it's not until I realize now that I should have made them faster.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only doing this part time, so a lot of the things that I'm working on are kind of take a backseat to the regular life, which is fine. That's great. That's the way it should be. But I really want to make games faster and faster, and so after that first game, it took me about 2 years to make City Tuesday. It just took me longer to make the second game, which was Rotato.
Mm-hmm.
So I did start pretty soon after to make Rotato. It just took. I realized how fast it takes to make games, and I'm constantly. It's a constant struggle to speed up the development of games.
So Rotato's the one that you actually founded the company and got other people involved with?
Yeah, that was the first one for Floor 27 Industries. That was with Matt and Heen. They're my co-workers, and we put that game out together, and it was sort of a test game to see if we could cooperate. And we released it about a year ago.
Very cool. So you got together, you made a game. What happened? Did it do well? You reached number one. You make $1 million a month now.
No.
Okay.
No, the game was really it was our most simple game. We wanted to make sure that we had all the equipment working and everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of our sound check, I would say, a digital soundtrack. Back to rock and roll, if we're talking rock and roll. So from a digital standpoint, or a digital sound check, it did not. We got some good reviews and we got some downloads. I think we got about maybe 2,000 downloads. But what we really saw was what it takes to make a game on the App Store.
Mm-hmm. And you made it in Objective-C.
Yes, it was an Objective-C game released on iOS.
So how did you find like working in that? Like, did you guys use Objective-C before? You guys are coders, or at least one of you on the team was a coder, day job.
Yeah, all three of us by day job were coders.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 coders. I do design on the side as well. And so it was it's like trying to write a painting. It is really slow and laborious to write in Objective-C. It's a very long, hard process. You can't freely experiment. If you want to experiment something, it takes a long time to do that.
Yeah, it's really hard to iterate in it.
Yeah, I wouldn't prototype anything in Objective-C.
So after you made this game, you switched to Game Maker.
Yes. Well, the game took about a year to make. This simple game called Rotato. Now, that's not. It's a year in, 3 guys working part-time on our first project. So
yeah,
it took a long time.
Not a full-time year. That's a part-time.
It was probably like if we added up one man person or one mythical man month, it really was like probably it would have taken us about 2 months. But anyway, so it was such a long development process. We said we had a reflection moment. We said we gotta get something that's a little bit faster, and we actually moved to Game Maker which if you know anything about development, that's a technological step back. A lot of people say.
So we were talking about this right before we started recording, that like Game Maker's not a step back. People, who people are coders, they think like, oh, this is a drag and drop interface. This is, more simple. This is beneath me. And it's like, no, it saves you hours and hours and hours of work, and you can iterate on it. You can focus on implementation rather than just like getting something to appear on the screen and move to the left.
I should have qualified that. Yes, a step back in the mindset of programmers, in the acceptance of programmers. It's a step back.
It's unquestionable that there is that perception with like people who poo-poo Game Maker, and those people tend not to use it. But I think people who actually use it, like you and I, a lot of people in the industry, like they realize how powerful those kinds of tools are, even just from like a prototyping point of view. If you can get the idea of your game done in a couple weeks, and you can see if it's fun, and you can iterate on your design, like that's just so important compared to spending 2 months to do the same thing.
Yeah, I believe so. And that was really what freed us. I could get the game prototyped. I prototyped it over a Christmas vacation. Our next game, which is Wizard Golf, I was able to prototype that in a couple weeks, and it was wonderful. It was so freeing. It was like actually being able to like, to run around as opposed to being chained down by having to code up a whole architecture for a game, which is I just saw it as such a waste of time.
So tell me about Wizard Golf.
Okay, Wizard Golf is a game we released about 2 weeks ago, and it is as much of what it sounds like. It is called Wizard Golf RPG. In it combines a golf game with a dungeon crawler. So you play a wizard who has to get to the end of every hole using as few shots as possible.
So the wizard is the golf ball.
If we want to get RPG technical, it would be considered a transportation spell, I would say. So the wizard casts transportation spells over and over again, and during that transformation, he becomes a ball of energy and transmits
that
himself.
You have a little bar, and you have to tap at the right moment, the right power, and similar to... So you have that golf game mechanic as a movement mechanic of a dungeon crawler.
Absolutely.
All right. It's two different kinds of games that are not normally mashed together. So who's your audience? I mean, is your audience people who like golf games, or is your audience people who like dungeon crawlers? Are you trying to go for both? Are you trying to go for neither? Are you trying to go for a third set?
It would definitely be the dungeon crawler fan base. But I would say that the people who like dungeon crawlers, but they don't like all the trappings of it. In other words, I think dungeon crawlers have gotten, especially with Rogue, the roguelikes and all that, they've really become burdened by having to be difficult and so hard, and like I think a lot of what like what's that game, the one with where you die a lot, it's called Dark Souls. That's a great dungeon crawler, but it's so hardcore that I don't think a lot of people can grok it. And I really wanted to create the fun of exploring, like what's around the next corner, or what's there, without all the like, oh, am I going to die around this corner? How hard is it to get through? I wanted to make the ease of use so much better. And the best way to move, I think, on a touch interface, it's an iOS game. So the touch interface, what's like one of the most simplest interactions, which is drag to point and then tap to fire, or to aim, or to actually fire.
Having that good interface is key, because a lot of games will be, I'm going to do this classic dungeon crawler design, and they just do the, D-pad, virtual D-pad with 2 buttons or 1 button. It's just like, this doesn't work on a touch. I don't want to have to rub my screen over and over in a corner wearing a hole in it.
Exactly. I saw that as like, hey, I still want to explore a dungeon, but I want to do it on this touch interface on the go really quick. And this was a great way to combine those two.
So do you play up the physics? Like I only played the first course, I guess, level course. I'm not sure what terminology you use. But like, do you try and pay up like the shot physics aspect, or is it more so you move in this golf-like fashion, but you're really, not worried about getting the fewest shots? You're just kind of exploring and collecting stuff.
We kind of cover both, and I think that's one of the things we're working on, is really to refine that interaction. But the real thing that's interesting about this game is it's really about the movement between, how do you navigate this space? How do you navigate as quick as possible? Which I don't think is covered in dungeon crawlers. I mean, dungeon crawlers, you kind of like rub yourself against all the walls trying to find a secret or something. And I think that's not an interesting interaction to like try and find every open space. I think an interesting action is, how do I get there as fast as possible, which is almost like a speed run. So that's really what that interaction is all about, is get to the end as fast as possible.
So you're not time limited. Though. You can hit your time per each shot, but by speed you mean just number of swings, not like literal seconds.
Exactly, because it's turn based. So time is kind of how many shots you make. So
Mhm.
it's not really a speed run, but it's how efficient you can get to the end.
Interesting. So what kind of stuff are people collecting in the game? Like what is there to do besides get to the hole?
Well, there is loot, which is gems. So that's our base currency. You're really trying to get the money, and that allows you to buy upgrades like bigger health meter, bigger mana, because every advanced spell costs mana.
Hmm. So do you have a mana like? I was actually going to ask about that because I saw that it was like I got a 1 and it costs 2 mana. I'm like, wait, what? How much is mana? How much do I get? When do I get it back?
Yeah, there's a base one that really covers the it's no use. Like, in other words, it doesn't use any mana
Mm-hmm.
to cast. But there are advanced weapons that do cast mana, that do take mana to cast. And that was kind of a design decision we made, because it's really frustrating where if you just have the base weapon and you're just kind of moving around, you could die for unknown reasons. So we really play tested, and we found that people were just frustrated and unknown, where all of a sudden you just disappear because you ran out of mana. So we wanted a base weapon that you could make mistakes and you're not going to die instantly.
Oh, so you only get like so much mana per level.
Exactly, per
Does
course.
Does that number vary by the character or vary by the course? Like this course is a 5 mana course or a 10 mana course, or
It's per character, because what you can do is you can upgrade the mana. And
Mhm.
basically, by upgrading mana, that allows you to do more of the advanced spells, because you can blow stuff up, you can break walls and that sort of thing.
cool. So how are you monetizing this, or what's the plan to monetize it?
Well, it is free to play, which I think is a really great way to engage with users, because there's no friction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people can just, if they want to play it, they can do it. Like, you could be, by the time you're listening to this podcast, by the time I said Wizard Golf RPG, you could be playing it, which I hope our listeners are.
I also noted that you had it where you can play a podcast in the background while you're playing.
Of course, that's the only way I play games, is with a podcast in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, that's how we're free to play, and I really think that's a great way for people to get into the game. But you can buy gems in case, if there's something that you really want, but you don't want to spend the time grinding for that. We allow you to buy the gems and get there faster. I don't think, as a guy who's got games to make and a family and a job, I don't want to be grinding. So we allow you, if you've got the time, if you've got the money, to shortcut that. But we also do things like allow you to buy extra inventory slots, and the reason for that is it allows you to really get through dungeons faster, because some dungeons do allow multiple weapons.
So by inventory, you mean I can have more types of ones. So I can have the frost one plus the breaker one plus whatever else kind of one, right?
Exactly. Yep. You can really bring a full kit into the dungeon.
So what's your philosophy for like how much coin they should earn in this game? Like, or not coin, but gems they should earn if they don't want to pay money. Like, okay, I'm going to go through the game and not pay a cent. How long do I need to play the game in order to reach the second area or to get all the items? So, is it talking about like, oh, I think players should play for 5 to 10 hours. They should play for an hour. Like, what's the ratio there?
We scoped it to about 10 hours of gameplay. And so if you play for 10 hours, you can get through the game and have all the unlocks. That was kind of our base. And it's a game we're constantly evolving, constantly upgrading. So we're really looking at the base experience as it is now. You can get through the whole game in about 10 hours without using any upgrades. And we really used statistics and looked at how people were playing and how fast they could collect things to really target for that 10-hour time frame.
And so if I get all of the gems, if I purchase it, like if I buy $1 worth of currency, how many hours is that saving me?
Ooh, I'd have to look at the stats, but I think we scoped it out to about $1 an hour. So if you pay $10, you're just basically skipping that whole 10-hour game that we put together.
That's actually was going to be my next point. So like, let's say I spent $10 in currency. Did I just ruin the game for myself? Like what engages me to play?
Really what we did was, you did not do it. I wanted to make it the experience very similar to playing the game in black and white versus playing it in full color.
Mm-hmm.
So if you play the game for free, it's kind of like you're playing a black and white experience. You're still able to see everything, but you're just like, man, I can see exactly how full and rich of an experience I can get if I were to pay for it. And that's kind of the underlying theory I had throughout the process.
But that's also the part where you're going to get in the most trouble when dealing with people who don't pay, because remember, you got 97% plus of your user base is never going to give you a cent.
That's
The
true.
vast majority of users. So if the vast majority of your users have to play, a black and white game, so to speak, metaphorically, for the first, 5 to 6 hours, that might be more like if your game is cool by being in full color, you're cool with having all these abilities and cool stuff. If the best parts about your game are inaccessible to 97% of your audience, it's going to create some problems.
I wouldn't say, okay, maybe the color analogy was the worst. We just recently.
No, I mean, I'm taking part of the analogy, but the idea of, you obviously have these really cool wands, really cool spells, and the time it takes to unlock those, you have to think of it not as the ratio of just long enough that people will pay me $1, because only less than 3% of those people will actually do so. It has to be just long enough to keep me interested and keep me reasonable that if I kept playing, I could get another one of these pretty easily. And then someone who pays $1 gets a lot more. And like, oh man, I could, get 5 more weapons or whatever the ratio is.
And that's an excellent point. I mean, that's one of the things that we did was each upgrade, you can see the next power up above it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you upgrade it to level 1 wand, because each one will increase like the explosion size and how much damage it costs. So you can kind of see, it's just the next step. And we don't want to penalize people and say, oh, you have to pay to actually use this. Everybody can unlock everything without having to pay. It's just, it'll take them a little bit longer. It'll take them a little bit longer to do it. And that's, some people have more time than money, and some the other way around.
So the goal is to get, the fewest strokes as a general thing, right? Because you got the golf rule set. What kind of bonuses do you give people? Like, did they get extra gems if they got par or they got an eagle?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really do reward people for doing the most efficient route. So if you get, I think it's about 10 under par for the whole course,
Mm-hmm.
the whole 9 holes, because every dungeon has nine floors, just like 9 holes to a golf course. By the time you get to the bottom, if you get, I think it's about 10 under, I'd have to look at our stats, but you'd get like 100 gem bonus. So that it's almost like winning a Masters tournament or something.
Mm-hmm.
You get a bonus after winning that.
So there is kind of an incentive, like instead of trying to go to collect all the gems that are within the levels, it's actually better just to go straight for the hole.
Exactly. You're kind of playing that risk reward where it's, hey, there might be a little bit of a detour that I could make in order to get these extra 10 gems, but if it takes a couple strokes off, you're actually overall probably losing out because you didn't go for that better score.
All right, let's talk tutorial. How are you teaching all this?
I don't like walls of text.
Mm-hmm.
So I know by day I'm a user interface designer, and I know even in warnings and messages, people never read more than 2 sentences. In fact,
that's generous. I was going to say 3 words.
Yeah, exactly. So we kept everything to just basically noun, verb,
Mm-hmm.
and we let them kind of interact with it. So I bolt everything down so that they can only kind of do one interaction at a time. So in the start there, I just want to teach them how that first interaction, which is touching the screen. So they can't really do much, and I say, I kind of let them hang out there, and then they can just touch the screen, and then that kicks off the next interaction, which is, hey, here's where you aim, and then they click the button to actually fire the ball. So it's really, it's allowing them to kind of control it at their own pace without me telling them, here's all the controls.
Mm-hmm. Self-guided experience.
Yes, as much as we could.
So, but what about like getting a 100 gem bonus, right? Like I played the game and I didn't know about that. Are you doing anything to teach users about that?
I think we could do a better job of kind of teaching them those bonuses, but we do at the end of the screen, we kind of tally up their score almost like a report card.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is to say score bonus up at the top and allow that, and see, you can watch the coins stack up, because actually we got that from Rogue Legacy. It does this great thing where at the end it shows you every monster that you killed in this great like visual experience that you've seen. You're like, yes, that is everything I collected. I got all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to show them like, here is what you got. And each one is broken down. Like, this is how much you collected. This is how much you killed. This is the loot that you found. So it really kind of shows it right up front and says, here it is. This is what you've got.
So you're really trying to emphasize even though it's structured as a golf game, you want people to think of it as a dungeon crawler. You want people to think of it as, I'm searching for loot and I'm getting this stuff and I get bonuses for finding things.
Yeah, it really is. It's a, I would say that's the core. I'd say it's more RPG than it is golf. It's really a new way to interact with a dungeon crawler.
So let's talk about the development process. How long did it take from like starting the prototype, over that Christmas break to publish on the store?
It took us about 12 months in linear time. In other words, not an actual.
Not 12 months of solid work.
Yeah, exactly. So it's about 12, almost to the day, 12 months.
And now, so you have 3 people on the team. Everyone's coder. Are you all doing a little bit of the coding, or is you just doing design? Someone else does the coding. How's that work?
We all share development duties since we all can code. We outsourced our art. We picked up we're trying to keep it cost as minimal as possible. So as the art, a lot of the sound effects we just picked up as freely available, but very high quality stuff that we use, because we just don't have that skill set, and we're trying to keep it as lean, minimum viable product. So we just outsourced all that and collected that. But the rest of us each coded the rest of the game.
Yeah, the game looks pretty good. Is it all free art, or do you have to pay for some of it?
It's a package that you pay. It's actually Oryx Design. If you Google Oryx Design, he's actually the art director for Destiny, Bungie's Destiny, and on the side he creates these great pixel art sprite sets that you can download, and it's a great way for you just to not worry about the art and use his sprite sets.
Awesome.
Yeah, highly recommend it. I think in early development, especially a small team like us who's kind of getting our feet wet in the App Store, we don't know how to do everything. Limit exactly to as few variables as possible, and we knew the art was good, and just let that art speak for itself, and not try and churn and spend money on artists and try and do that stuff. Just eliminate that whole side of the game, because that's like a whole third. I would even argue more than a third.
So what's your post-release plan? How's the game been received?
The concept is really great. Like people love the concept. They hear it and they say, "Oh, this is great. I love the idea." And then they play it. And I think we can really our next releases is really to tune the gameplay. We've gotten some great feedback about how areas we can improve. We really want to make that interaction really tight, as far as like casting the spell and actually aiming and that sort of thing. So that's really our post plan, is to get that just as tight as possible and really make sure that people keep with the game.
And you got a lot of analytics in the game too, so you're really looking at like how many people use which weapon and why and what levels they get to, and that's going to help a lot with figuring out what you need to do to make the game better and to get people playing it more.
Yeah, we know down to the whole when people stop playing, when they start playing, how frequently each one is played. So it's really, like I said, I want to work in video games because it's a medium that I can engage with. I know people are engaged with, and so with those metrics, I can really see. It's almost like looking into somebody's like mind while they're doing that stuff, and it's much more authentic than people saying, "Oh yeah, I like the game," because we did playtesting and analysis, and everybody that you show a playtest, which is the danger of playtest, is like, "Oh yeah, I really like this game."
Especially if those people are your friends.
Exactly.
You can't get feedback from friends. You got to go to your worst enemies.
Well, and some of the things we would take it to meetups and to other groups that kind of allow people to try out other games, and so they were anonymous people. They don't know me or have any game in it, but I still think even a face to face, you're standing there with it saying, here, play my game. They're still going to be more receptive, and they're going to say things that they don't actually think.
Yeah. Do you have any way for users to get feedback within the game, like to write up anything or send you an email?
Well, Apple's really good about, they always have a support link on their store page. So we do.
But you have to go to the store page.
Yeah. We don't have anything directly like says here, direct to my brain type of thing. But yeah, that's a neat idea.
No, you should totally have one. We had one in our game Blast Monkeys, and it was super, super helpful. We get a lot of email through that. And also, we would trick people too, because we wouldn't just say, whatever message they would send us. We'd also say what device they're using, what version of the game, and so we could get some really interesting feedback.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we really want to interact with our community because, like I said, people don't tell you what you think. There's an asterisk on that. That's when you're just playtesting your game. But the people who are willing to write in are fans. They like the game itself and they can see its potential. And so I think, going to forums and talking to real people and email support, I think you're going to get great feedback because these are people who love the game enough to write. They're going to have good insight that just an average casual player won't.
Yeah, this goes really well to newsletters, because I know you have a newsletter for the game. You were talking to me before about how great the engagement was. That was like your hardcore true fans.
Yeah, we're really taking this as a strategy. I do a lot of research into other like companion stores that are similar model, like the iTunes app store is crowded with tons and tons of games, tons and tons of players, and it's kind of, people say, a race to the bottom as far as price. And something that's a very similar model is the Kindle ebook store. Tons of content from thousands of writers and big audience, but the engagement's very, very tenuous, I think. And one of the things that ebook authors have found is the best way is to point people to their to a mailing list, and it's a great way of having engagement, so that you can say, here's our next book is coming out. And I think it's an underused resource, and I'm kind of testing it and trying to see if we can get the same response that ebook authors are having as independent developers do too.
Very cool, very cool. So right now you're focusing on tweaking the game, getting it ready, polishing out the mechanics so that it's smooth and you have high retention. What are you thinking your next steps are going to be after that? How are you going to get the breadth? How are you going to get people to be aware of the game?
Well, okay, so the first part is retention. We're using our statistics to really find out, hey, when are people leaving? What are we doing wrong? When do we kind of create a bad environment for our players? And so once we kind of tweak that, I think we're just going to let the word of mouth grow. I was talking to you a little bit earlier, and I think you had some great feedback from your own game. And kind of you had this great analogy that it's just like, even if you have 10 million people, it's a huge ocean. There's so many fish out there.
Yeah, there's an infinite number of players in the world. Nick can never saturate the market because the markets are just bigger than you can possibly imagine.
I mean, that what you said there was like eye-opening to me, because you hear so many times that it's like, if you read Gama Sutra postmortems, or you hear people complaining on Twitter, they think, oh, I released my game and it got 1,000 downloads and then nothing happened, and the App Store sucks. And I was like, I was nervous. I talked to you. I said, man, what do we do? How do we get it once we're off the hot new releases? What do we do? And you said, calm down, right? I mean, what's kind of your experience?
Yeah, like I was talking about, people think that when you release, that's like supposed to be your peak, right? And because there's so many games, thousands of games out there, that their release is their peak, and those are games that don't make it. Like, it's sad. I don't want to talk about like necessarily that they're bad games, but for whatever reasons, they're not popular, and something was wrong. It's not. It shouldn't be that your release month is big. Like that's old world thinking. That's old publishing styles. If I'm printing a game and I'm going to mail it to a store, the first 3 months is your best sales. And if you're coming from that industry, that's what you assume. Like, okay, this game's new, it's released for 3 months, and then something else is coming out on the shelf. But in the digital marketplace, we don't have to fight for shelf real estate like that. Games should grow over time. Even if you're a premium experience, pay once and then you own it, you still need to treat your app like it's a service industry. Like, you're constantly going to be updated. You're building this community around it. And hope, in theory, your first sale, your first day, is your worst day. That's really reassuring. You constantly grow more users and more stuff. It's exponential growth. I was telling you this before too. When you talk about a game has exponential growth, too many people focus on that last week. And exponential growth means that
you mean I'm sorry, but the last week of like Flappy Bird before it took off.
Yeah, Flappy Bird is an example, right? People focus on like Flappy Bird. In I forgot what month it became really big, right? But like, oh my God, it's getting like tens of thousands of downloads a day. And they think like, oh man, this is huge, and it blew up. And they look for like what happened, like at some point, like, oh well, this happened and then it went up. And it's not how it worked. It wasn't that the downloads were flat. Something happened and then tons of people started downloading it. Its chart is exponential growth. It starts off completely flat, and it grows a little bit over time, grows a little bit more, gets a little bit steeper, and exponentially, at some point, that's going to start just shooting straight up, literally vertical.
It kind of hits like a tipping point, it seems like.
Yeah, there's definitely, if you look at any, standard exponential growth chart, there's definitely kind of an area where it really starts turning. But that doesn't mean that the one thing that happened in an area is what it started the success. I don't know. Do you read many business books? Like straight business books? You ever heard of I'm being put on the spot. Good to Great by Jim Collins?
No, everybody always says, "Oh yeah, read Good to Great," but
it is a really, really fantastic book, and the very gross summary of it is that he interviews companies that went from doing well to doing really, really, really well, and he tried to figure out what they did right, and every one of them had a different answer, And he thoroughly concluded that every one of their answers were wrong, and that's not actually what they did that was successful. Is that they put a lot of good policies in place, and they were doing good business sometimes years before the breakthrough success. And he made the analogy of a flywheel, that every good decision the company made was a push on the flywheel. And eventually the flywheel got up to speed. And once it was going full power, suddenly the business started doing really, really well. And it wasn't any one push or any series of 3 good pushes that brought a flywheel up to speed, but just continual good decisions over time that brought their success.
I think that's a real positive. But, one thing I don't think every game can be like a Flappy Bird or, top of the App Store. What we're kind of what we're striving for is really like a sustainable model. And the reason we went to iOS, I told you I was originally on Xbox. That's an old school, like, it is really like your first couple of releases. There's not much of engagement there like there is on iOS. It's really, we're looking
or any
for
of
like
the mobile platforms. iOS isn't necessarily special in that regard.
Yeah, or mobile, I should say. Yeah, I'm talking to, in general.
Android, Windows Phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Kindle.
If I say iOS, I'm talking Kleenexes or something, like
exactly.
Brand name. But one of the things that attract us is it is a sustainable. Like, I don't think it has to be. We're not shooting for like top 100 or something. I think that market is totally out of our reach. I don't even want that. But do you think that there is a sustainable model of, hey, we're like in the top 300 or something, and we just we have our fan base and that we engage with them regularly, and I'm not looking for exponential. I'm just looking for a nice, kind of steady fan base.
I mean, it depends a lot on your game, right? It depends a lot on how you're monetizing. If your game monetizes by the fact that 3% whatever you'll make money on, and your goal is to just get more players, that's what a lot of those freemium games are pushing up the formula and trying to get people at those, for lack of a better term, slot machine games, where they have a specific formula of, okay, we get this many players, and that'll lead to this many dollars. And they tweak the game in the low levels. They get not ranked, whatever. They get it out there and they tweak it so that they can find out conclusively, or at least, scientific prediction that, all right, if we spend X amount of dollars, we will get X plus $1. We spend X amount of dollars, that'll get Y amount of users. Y amount of users will earn X plus 1 amount of dollars back. And it doesn't matter if that profit margin is literally 1 cent.
Yeah, you put $1 million in there.
Exactly. Because at that point, they just got to get some funding to get a seed. They will literally put millions of dollars. Something I actually found out, like when we were, when Blast Monkeys was number 1 in the stores, we were looking at all these games like, oh my God, these guys, they're making like $1 million a month with these games. And we're not making anywhere near that. Like, what are we doing wrong? We're like the poorest number 1 game out there. And years later, I started talking with some people who were like number 1 at the time. And they said, oh yeah, we had like $1 million a week ad budget.
Oh yeah.
We were deep in the hole and we didn't make that money back until we were on the store for like over 6 months. I was like, oh wow, crap, that's how you're doing it.
Exactly.
Like they made the money back. They were profitable, but the bandwidth is that engine. Now, that's it. You don't need to be that kind of game to be successful. You don't need to compete in that space to be successful. In fact, I would even say competing in that space, you won't be successful because you have guys with $1 million budgets.
And they have teams dedicated just to retention. I mean, we're 3 guys. I mean, what we're really shooting for is like kind of, just a dedicated fan base that we can engage with. I don't like to look at the tops, like the Flappy Birds and the Game of War or whatever
the people you should be looking at is the Vlambeers.
Yeah, who
the super time forces out there.
Actually, I like boring games that are like wildly successful, and like I think Vlambeer is great because they have great personality. You know what? An interesting game. I don't know if you followed it. It's called Flow, and I'm not talking that game company's Flow. I'm talking the iOS game Flow. Have you played that?
I don't know the iOS game Flow.
I know they've released on Android as well, and they are totally unwritten. Like if I was a writer for a game or from a game website, I would write about these people. They're a couple. They made a game. The guy used to work for Microsoft. They made this game called Flow, and it's like if you look at its earnings, like it's consistently like in the top 200. no marketing. It's not a crazy game. It's just a simple little puzzle game. It's made by two people like that. It just is engaging. It's like a clean interface, and it's just simple. And there's not craziness. I don't know who they are. They don't get any attention because it's boring. They're just like a workhorse. You know, they just like get the job done, get some good downloads, get good engagement, and they're just like there.
And there are so many stories of developers that are successful at that. So like to go back to your original question, absolutely yes. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean it's even statistically likely, but it is absolutely obtainable to not only be successful without necessarily becoming number one, but also to become number one. Like it shouldn't just be like, oh, we'll never be number one. We'll just ignore that goal. If your goal is to have really good retention, really players who really engage and love your game, and people who talk about it, money and players come after that.
Yeah, and we're not even focused on money. You know, we're a free-to-play game, but I don't think that message gets out there enough, that just because you're free-to-play doesn't mean you're like a money-grubbing, like sell your, you know, your family for it. It's like we're really...
And sometimes you shouldn't be. You know, like
Exactly.
I tell a lot of people, if you have like less than 100,000 active users, ads might not be worth it to be in your game at all.
Yeah.
Because like, what do you make with ads? The average CPM, they say, I say they as in every advertiser I've ever talked to, is like 50 cents to $2. And, you know, there's going to be advertisers out there.
So
like,
maybe you should
offer
explain
you
that.
$3. Yeah, CPM is cost per mille. Mille means 1,000 in Latin. So if you have an ad impression game, you have 1,000 people play your game and they each see one ad, you'll earn 50 cents to $2, which is nothing.
Yeah.
Not much. Now, you know, once you start getting 200,000 users and they each play the game, you know, maybe half of them play the game in one day and they all look at 7 ads. All right, that's not maybe, you know, sell my house money, but it's still like decent money. And, you know, once you get into the millions, it starts actually becoming pretty good. But if you have less than 100,000, it might be more worthwhile to just not have ads at all and not annoy your players, especially like if you have big annoying ads. You know, if you have ads that break the experience, people are going to stop playing your game. You know, I've had people come up to me for my game and they'll say, I can make you so much money. I'll make you, you know, whatever CPM. And what they offer is that as soon as Blast Monkey starts up, we can play a 30-second video that they have to watch. It's like, okay, I would make a ton of money for like a week. And then all my players would quit and I would make no money. And people don't like these advertiser companies. They don't care. They're always looking for new games. There's tons of new games out there. There's tons of games out there. And all they care about is making money this week. Because next week, the company's in a different game that is at number one. And they look at games as a commodity. They look at the games as, you know, the market of every, you know, 3 months you have to release a new game. And if your game isn't popular, the 3 months, just move on to another one. But from an indie perspective, that's really not how you're supposed to look at it. You can't let that kind of advertiser mindset, which not talking bad about advertisers, you know, you have to deal with them and work with them because they'll make you money. You don't want to like poo-poo them, but they don't understand you. They're not game designers. They're not running a company or trying to build a brand or a business.
But back to the advertising. I mean, in your top platform for Blast Monkeys, do you use ads?
Yes.
And that's because you've achieved that 200,000 kind of number, or it's worthwhile?
When did we put it in? I think when the game first launched, it didn't have ads. But the caveat of that is that the game was a weekend prototype that we made in like 2 days, and thought, okay, this is cool. And then like 2 weeks later, after just sitting on a hard drive, like, we'll just release it anyway. And then people started downloading and liking it. And so it was like, oh, let's just start adding more to this. And we'll just start adding more to this. And then about like by 2 months in, we're like, okay, people seem to really like this game. People play through all the levels. Why don't we upgrade the art? Why don't we add more content? Why don't we add more worlds, more mechanics? And we'll commit to updating the game every 2 weeks. And then we did that for a few years.
So 2 weeks, like
every 2 weeks, we're releasing new content.
That's great. I mean, that's one of the things I think that, you know, talking to you, it's really, it's kind of like chill out about the game. Like, it will happen. You know, like, as long as you play the long game, play patient, don't try and just like, don't worry like, oh, my launch crashed.
The short game is the long game. Like, you came into me, it's like, oh, my short-term problem is retention. I was like, no, your long-term problem is retention. Like, if you can solve retention, all your other problems they're gone. Like, if you have players, you're making money.
Yeah.
Like, unless your game doesn't have a way for people to give you money, you're going to get money if there's people in your game constantly. You'll find a way to put an ad in it. You'll find in-app purchases. You'll find a way that will work with your players and work with your game. There's so many different ways you can monetize. I mean, hell, if you just have a game that's popular, you can even monetize it with, having no way the game itself makes money. And then you go to a big company and you say, hey, can I make, this brand for your game? Look at the Temple Run clones for like Brave and all that, or
Wizard
even
of
Angry
Oz or
Birds
something.
Rego, and like those are big time deals, and there's a lot of smaller deals in between for companies too. So I mean, not to say that like licensing is the be all end all goal either, but just think outside the box. Like, you're not just limited towards in-app purchases or throwing in an interstitial ad.
I think the problem is, and it's hard to find this in the media, is at least in the game development media, is everybody talks about the games that are hits. Like, everybody talks about Crossy Roads or the different war games, those strategy games. There's like this whole. So they either talk about that last week, like you say, like, oh, this game's hot, oh, this guy just put out this Crossy Road game and it just blew up and it's the biggest thing ever. But it's really, you don't see that he released games before that didn't hit, or he released games and built up that audience. He kept touching that flywheel and pushing it and pushing it. You don't hear that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm trying to find resources that really talk about that kind of like, the people that they don't make headlines, no authors write about them. Well, they just kind of silently kick that flywheel.
They're reverse, right? Like, people have this notion that a reviewer's going to discover my game. They're going to say, oh, this is awesome. Like, even you just like entertained that fantasy a moment ago. Like, I would love to write about these guys. And then more people will pay attention to them and it'll become more popular. And that's not how reviews work. Reviews work because they're already popular and paying attention. That's not how they used to work traditionally, but how they work now is that if you're a review site, and I've talked to multiple reviewers, and what the game they write about is the game that their viewers most demand they write about next, and they get the most emails and tweets saying, hey, talk about this game next. And what happens is that they talk about games that are already popular and already a growing community. They're not reviewers so much as they are reporters. They report on what other people are paying attention to, rather than, like, say, taking a new product, like, a traditional magazine reviewer used to get a copy of the disc game 3 months before release kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that, the main thing that I think people, and to my audience about what I'd like to write about, is I'm talking about other game developers. And the reason I'd like to write about those other games, those kind of middling games that nobody talks about, is not because I think they should be thrown into the spotlight. I think they're doing fine where they are. It's like, don't ruin them. I'm talking to other developers who say, and I'm trying to explain to them, like, don't worry about the big guys. Don't try and follow their game. Even though it's getting headlines, don't worry about that. I want a story to say, like, look at this company that you've never heard of, who's just making a great game, and they're just a slow burn. They're doing great. Nobody writes about those type of things, not because they need to get the spotlight. Yeah,
because honestly, the stories are boring. Like how many restaurants come and go? People, the restaurant industry is one of the hardest to get into. If you open a restaurant, most likely you're going to lose money. Most restaurants don't make money within like 5 years. They're like one of the worst kinds of businesses you can start statistically. Game development is not so great either. There's a lot of problems. A lot of companies out there. It's really hard to make money in the industry. And the average of all companies, game development or otherwise, is that they don't make any money at all for the first 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, if you're making money, period, within 3 years, your company is like fantastically ahead of the curve statistically. And you have to approach it like a business. You have to approach it where, if I'm just releasing a project and it's dead after 3 months, for one, it's actually no game's really dead after 3 months. But if you think it is and you're done, like, oh, I guess I wasn't successful. Oh, well, I won't do that venture again. It's like, could you imagine a restaurant closing after 3 months? Like, it's got to be really, really, really bad.
But there is a limit. I mean, how do you know when to move on from a game and say, you know what, this isn't, I can't keep.
That's the magic question, right?
Exactly.
Because I think the bottom line is that the game doesn't matter. That's my honest opinion. It's kind of weird because, like, we're game designers and we love games and the game matters and you want to, like, make a cool game, but making a good game is actually pretty easy. Like, a lot of people know what a good game is like. A lot of people know the characteristics of a good game. It's engaging. People like to play it. That it looks nice. You got solid sounds. You have an easy to use interface. People know what a good game is, and there's a lot of games out there. And it's like, oh, tell me which one of these are winners. It's like, well, that depends on the team. And if you're a venture capitalist, you don't look at the products necessarily. You don't really care about the products. You care about making the game, investing in the people. And the people are what make the game. And if you have a good team, you can make any game into a winner. All right, this episode's going way too long, so we need to start wrapping it up. I always like to end every episode with games we've been playing lately, not just making. And for me, I just went to PAX South in Texas, so I've been playing tons of board games. I played Power Grid. I've given to a tournament of that. Carcassonne Settlers, all the usual. I learned Castle Panic, which was super fun. And I actually bought a new indie game, an indie board game called Billionaire Banshee, which is this. The only way I can describe it is that it's a dating game. So it's a dating party game.
Is the Banshee dating somebody?
So I'm not a big fan of the name, but the idea is that a billionaire banshee is like one of the combinations that could come up. So it's a party game, and let's say it's my turn. I'll flip over. I'm gonna look at a potential lifelong mate, someone I could possibly marry, and they're gonna have a perk and a quirk. So their perk might be that they own a giant robot, and that's like super cool and they can control it or whatever, but their quirk is that they have a weird fetish. And I'll be polite for the audience because the game not so maybe PG-13 plus rated in terms of how specific it'll go into, and then everyone at the table, then including yourself, then votes, and you go around the table and say, okay, would I date that person with that perk and that quirk? And then you reveal your answer, and everyone who matched gets a point. So the person who wins the game knows their friends the best. It's like super fun. It's called Billionaire Banshee. He had a Kickstarter, successfully funded, and he's just printing out. He's sold out on the show. I got one of his copies, so he should have more soon. I don't know what his website is, or I'll plug it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that sounds good.
What have you been playing lately?
Actually, I've just picked up Peggle. I know it's been around for a while, but they
dive into an old game. You should if you haven't played it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to, and there's this other game that kind of got me to go to Peggle. It's called Basical. It's nobody's played this game. It's wildly unpopular, but it's called Basical, like Basic AL, and it's the same gameplay as Peggle, but it actually plays like a roguelike where you drop objects and they just kind of fall down the little pegboard. But the interesting thing about it is it plays like a roguelike because if you hit a red X, your game's over and you have to start over. And you kind of build up your thing. Like you can buy more kind of balls to drop, although it's a little circle zero. It's like very basic art. But as somebody who's made a rogue or a dungeon crawler crossed with golf, I'm really interested in a Peggle game crossed with a roguelike. So I recommend Basical and Peggle. Play them together. It's like chocolate ice cream mixed with vanilla. They kind of go together well on the palate. I would try both of those games.
Sounds awesome. All right, if you want to find more about the show, you can go to beindynow.com or go to my blog, tobiahmarks.com, where I have cool articles, stuff like that. Where can we find more about Floor 27 Industries?
Well, it's floor27industries.com. I tweet from Adventure Mountain. So that's my Twitter handle. It's AdventureMTN. And that's probably the best place to find us.
Awesome. Looking forward to hearing more, and awesome success of your #1 Wizard golfing game in a few months.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks for being on the show. All right, for everyone else out there, go out and make some games.